Hey guys, Steve Good here with the Scrollsaw Workshop. Went out in the shop tonight to demo a product that I received the other day, and I just want to make a little bit of a video here to show you what it does and what I think about it. Now, let me say right off the bat, this is not a paid endorsement. I did not get paid to make this video, but I did receive the product for free. So you can, put that in the back of your mind while I'm doing this review. The product I got was from Bigfoot Products up in Canada. David owns the company up there, and he's all the time coming up with new products and kind of unique ideas, and I thought this kind of fit the bill as fairly unique. I've not seen this done before. It doesn't mean that nobody's done it, but I've not seen it as a product, and so I thought it was kind of neat. And I've always said that David, he must spend every night trying to think of something new because he's always coming up with unique products. So anyway, I'm going to review one from him tonight. And the product that he has come up with, the name of it is the Beltbinder Multi-Fiber Strips. And what these strips allow you to do is to take rolls of sandpaper and cut them to length that you need and bind them together with these multi-fiber strips so you can make your own belts for your upright sander, or for, in this case that you're going to see tonight, I used it with my Sand Devil, which is one of my favorite hand sanding tools that I've got in the shop. And he talks about the cost savings that you can get from making your own belts. Now, he talks about making these belts for pennies, and it's actually a little more than that. You'll have to take the price that I come up with here a little bit for a grain of salt, because it does depend on the quality of the sandpaper that you buy. I bought a very high quality sandpaper. So you have to, add some other things in there. So let me jump over here to the slideshow real quick, and let's take a look at what you get. I'm going to zoom in on this picture just a little bit. Right here is the microfiber strips, and you will cut these to size depending on the size of the belt that you're gluing together. And you either get two, let me go back to his website here real quick. Let me talk about this just for a second before we go any farther. What you can buy from David is you can buy 2 yards of this belt binder multi-fiber strips, and what they are is they're basically just a very strong material, so they hold the joint together really well. You can buy 2 yards, which is going to make you a lot of belts, for $12.95. You can buy 4 yards for $19.95, and then the belt binder jig, which is basically just a jig to kind of hold things together while you put the clamp on the belt, and that's $19.95. I'll be perfectly honest with you, I did not use the jig. It comes unassembled. I did go ahead and assemble it, and I think it would have worked fine. It may even been easier than what I did, but I just didn't use it. I just did it my way. So you can make up your mind. If you buy the deluxe kit, which comes with the strips, you get 4 yards of the strips, and you get the jig, and that comes at $34.95. So when you take all these prices in account, and again, you can make up your mind how useful the jig is to you. You can make these belts for again, the 3-inch wide belts for my Sand Devil, which we're going to do tonight. I can make each individual belt for somewhere between $1 and $1.06, depending on what waste you get out of your 35-foot roll, what waste you get out of the strips when you cut them down. So that's about the price that it takes me to make a belt with this high quality sandpaper. When I buy these belts for the Sand Devil, they cost me about $2.50 a piece. So you're getting about 100% savings, and that's not bad. It's not pennies, but it's a good savings. It's it's 50% or 100% price break. The other thing that's the advantage about these is if you buy a 35-foot roll of sandpaper, which I did, which cost me $22, I've got enough sandpaper there to make a lot of these belts, and so I'm never going to be in the middle of a project and say, oh, I don't have any of these Sand Devil belts. I can't buy them locally because they're an odd size. I always have to order them offline. So you have the advantage of always having them there and ready to build. And so far, and I'll show you here in the video slideshow, that the process is really very easy. It just takes a little bit to build them, and I think it's pretty convenient on top of the price savings. So let's jump over here again to this picture, and again, this is the microfiber material that we're going to be using in the seams. This is the jig, and I'm just showing it here next to my upright sander so you get an idea of the size of the jig, and that's all that was for. Let's go to the next slide. This is the 35-foot roll of sandpaper I purchased. Now, I could have bought 4-inch wide, and this is what I probably should have done if I'd have been thinking, at the time I did it. I could have bought 4-inch wide sandpaper, and I could have made belts for my 4-inch upright sander, and then when I got ready to make them for my 3-inch wide Sand Devil, I could have just cut a strip off of it, off the side and cut it down to 3 inches. At the time, I didn't think that through very well, but it would have been a better savings for me. Another thing to consider is sometimes when you buy the pre-made belts, they come in a box of 4 or 6, and you may buy a box that has multiple different grits of sandpaper in it. When you're doing this, you're basically going to buy one grit. So you want to make up your mind whether it's very important for you to have multiple grits of your belt. For me personally, when I use my upright sander, I'm almost always using 120 grit, and when I use my Sand Devil, I either have 80 or 120 in it also. So for me personally, buying a 4-inch wide roll of 35 foot of 120 grit sandpaper, I would be fine, because I never change those grits on either of those devices. The sanding that I do, the more detailed sanding I do, by hand with just flat sheets of sandpaper usually. Again, this is the front end of the belt that I'm going to be replacing on my Sand Devil, and this is a jig. And this is the Sand Devil. Now, the Sand Devil I've reviewed before here on the Scrollsaw Workshop, and it is absolutely my favorite hand sander that I've ever owned. And what it allows you to do is, this is a release clamp right here. You put these belts on, then you clamp it down, and you get a nice tight fit of the belt. And the thing that's so nice about it is I've got all these different contours that I can use. I can use this edge, I can use this contour, I can use this small contour here, this one right here, or of course the flat side. Another thing I'm able to do is to take this sandpaper, loosen this clamp, slide the sandpaper off the edge of the jig a little bit, and you can get into some very fine corners and stuff with that. So again, I've done a review of this before, so I won't get into that too much more. But it's a great tool. It's my favorite sanding tool. I go to this on almost every large project that I make in the shop. Now, what I decided I needed to do was figure out the exact length of this belt. I know it's 3 inches wide, but I wasn't absolutely sure what the length was. So I've got this used up piece of sandpaper here, and I decided to take it off of the Sand Devil and then actually cut it so I could lay it out flat and take a yardstick and measure it. And it ended up being 21 and 1/16 or 21 and 1/32 of an inch long. So that's how long I needed to cut the piece of sandpaper off my roll. So that worked out very well. So now I have laid out my roll of sandpaper, and again I'm marking the 21 and 1/32 inch on the sandpaper. Now, one thing you want to do is you're going to have a cut on each end of this strip of sandpaper when you get done, and you want these cuts to be very accurate, because when you go to seam them together, you want them to fit together nice and snug. So the way I got around that is I actually just used a square, and once I figured out the length that it needed to be and mark it, I just put a square across there, used an X-Acto knife to cut it, and before I cut it I had also cut the other end and then measured the length. So I had two very nice 90-degree cuts, which is pretty important. Okay, here's the belt after I've got it cut, and it's ready to be glued together. Now, here is the microfiber strip that I cut down to longer than the length I needed, because it only needs to be the length of the width of this belt, but it's just easier to trim it when you get done. What I did is I applied super glue on the bottom of this roll of sandpaper, and I applied it to 1/2 of this seaming strip. So underneath this section right here is super glue. Now, this is not something David recommended, but I just tried it. I also sprayed some super glue activator on this cloth because I wanted to see how it would work, and it ended up working really well. So I put the super glue on the back of this about 1/2 inch in, so I could cover half of this seam, and then I put a little bit of activator on the material. I pressed it and held it together a little bit until it started to dry, which is pretty quick with super glue. And then the next step is you glue the other end together, which I did it exactly the same way. Half an inch in, I put the super glue, put it on the other half of the fiber strip. Now this is where you would normally use the jig, and you'll see that in his demo video, where you would use that jig to give yourself room to put this clamp in. I didn't use it. Like I said, it was fine. It wasn't that there was any problem with it, as I just took 2 pieces of wood because I wanted to get clamps on both sides of the seam. And when you do it this way, you actually start out with just a clamp on one side. Now when you took it off, you could go ahead and put a clamp on the other side, but I just skipped a step and did it this way. So your judgment whether you like it or not. So here it is. I'm letting the seam dry up. In between these pieces of wood, which there's one on the bottom and one on the top, I put wax paper, and that's to prevent the super glue from gluing itself to these blocks of wood, and I let it clamp. Now in David's video, he talks about letting this set for at least an hour and even 24 hours for it to cure. I pushed that limit a little bit because I put the activator on it. I probably had this thing out of here in 30 or 45 minutes. Again, I just wanted to test it. So that's what I did. When I took it apart, which you can see in the next section here, I did go ahead and cut off the edges of the seam material so it would be flush with the side of the belt. And you can see here, one of the things David has you to do is once you get it glued on the back, he has you run a thin bead of glue on this side of the sandpaper right where the seam is, just to give it a little more reinforcement. Now you should use a fairly liquid glue, and I had a gel super glue, so I made a little bit of a mess right here that if you used a fine liquid glue you could get it in the seam a little better and you wouldn't make the mess that I made, but it still seemed to work fine. This is the mess I made, and when I put my finger over this, it was a little rough, but it wasn't as bad as it looks in this picture. But this is going to be on a stationary sand devil tool, so it's not like it's going to move and I can just move this out of the way. But I thought, just to be safe, I took some 180 grit sandpaper, maybe 120, and I sanded that seam down smooth, and by the time I got done you couldn't even feel the seam. But again, if you ran a fine bead of liquid super glue across here, I don't think you would have this mess at all. I don't think it would be a problem. Might be wrong, but I don't think it would be. To test this thing, when I got it out and had let it dry for, like I said, only an hour, I decided I would pull on it pretty hard, and if I broke it, I broke it. I've got plenty more sandpaper to make more. I pulled on this thing really hard, and when David said this microfiber material is strong, he's right. It's strong, and the super glue really puts this together as a nice welded seam. Just to give it kind of a long-term test, I went ahead and hung a 5-pound block of wood from this belt hanging from a board, and it's been hanging now for about 3 or 4 hours, and this joint's not going to break. The only thing that I came up with is on the very corner of one piece, I didn't get the super glue spread out real well, so the material was lifting just on a very small corner. So I did go back and put a little bit of super glue on the back of the material there, and that seemed fine. It glued right up because I sprayed the activator on it and it set instantly. So in my opinion, the strength of these belts is fine. The convenience of having a roll of sandpaper that I can make belts from, I like that. The cost savings of about 50%, you know, I don't know that I use enough sandpaper that the cost saving is as important as the convenience. And again, you have to make up your mind whether that making the belts is a convenience to you or whether spending the extra money and buying them is a convenience. Like I said earlier, for me, just having it there, knowing I can make a belt when I'm in the middle of a project at 3 o'clock in the morning and I don't have another belt handy, I can just make one. I should have bought the larger belt and cut these down to size for the smaller Sand Devil, so I'll know that the next time, because I am going to buy a 4-foot roll of sandpaper now to make belts for my upright sander. The problem is, now that I have this 3-inch wide roll, I'll probably never use the 4-inch for this. I'll just make them out of this. So up front, if you know that, you might want to consider buying just the larger width and cutting it down. Of course, if you do cut it down, you're going to have to, you know, come up with a fairly easy way to make a straight cut. And I would just lay a yardstick over it, metal yardstick, and use the X-Acto knife to cut down the length of it after you cut it to length. So I don't think that's a problem. That is the slideshow that I've got of this product, again, you can go to David's site at bigfootproducts.ca, or you can just do a Google search for Bigfoot Products and you'll find it. Again, the price is $34.95 for the deluxe kit, $12.95 for the 2 yards, and $4.95 for $19.95 for the 4 yards. And this is not a bad deal. You will get your money back out of this after you have made a few belts. So, you know, it won't take that many belts, especially if you go with the $12.95 for the 2 yards. You're going to get that money back pretty quick. So I hope that's a little bit of a helpful review for you if you decide to take a look at this product, and we'll test it over the next several months here in the shop, and maybe 6 months from now I'll come back and give you a little better idea of the durability of it. Right now I don't see a problem with the durability, but again, it's something you might have to use for a while to know for sure. I'm Steve Good. Thanks for being here with me at the Scrollsaw Workshop, and we'll see you next time.